Hello and welcome to the South Carolina Herbaria Data Standards Workshop. Today, we will talk about the data standards and how to enter data for the fields that are applicable to all herbaria on Symbiotis Cernak portal. This presentation was created by SCDNR, NHT, Botany and Plant Conservation Program, and the A.C. Moore Herbarium at the University of South Carolina, along with input from numerous South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia curators and staff. Before we start, let me introduce the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources Natural Heritage Trust Botany and Plant Conservation Program. Keith Bradley is the state botanist and our team lead. Samantha Tessel is our upstate botanist. Eric Ungberg is our low country botanist, and I am the team data manager. Our group is tasked with tracking and conserving South Carolina's rare and of conservation interest plant species. We do this in 3 steps: assess, track, and conserve. We assess all of South Carolina's native flora and give them conservation rankings from S1 to S5, where S5 is the most common, SX, extirpated, or SH, historical, following nature reserve criteria. We track all S1, S2, and S3 species in the state and other species of conservation interest. We do this by collecting and curating data from a variety of sources, including fieldwork, herbarium specimens, iNaturalist records, published materials, legacy natural heritage trust data, and data provided to us by our conservation partners. We then use our tracked species data to guide conservation and management of heritage preserves and to purchase more heritage preserve land.
Hi everyone, I'm Avery Browning and I'm the Volunteer Manager and Assistant Collections Manager for USCH. I wanted to give everyone a quick intro to the A.C. Moore Herbarium. We are located in downtown Columbia at USC's main campus. Most of you know our curator, Dr. Herrick Brown. We have just over 130,000 specimens and we are still actively growing. We also work closely with SCDNR and we have a wonderful team of close to 20 individuals that are staff, research affiliates, and volunteers of all ages that work in and out of the herbarium.
These are the fields covered in this presentation. They were chosen because they are applicable to all herbaria. When you are viewing this presentation as a PDF, you can use this page to quickly navigate to specific fields. If data processors are doing skeletal data, we suggest prioritizing catalog number, additional identifier value, USCH's stamp accession number, collector name and number, collection date, latest determination, country, state, and county. This prioritized skeletal data will allow SCDNR and other groups using herbarium data from Cernak and data aggregators such as GBIF to better understand the number of records versus the number of unique occurrences.
We will now go over our collector information fields.
Our protocol for the collector/observer field is to enter the collector's name in the format last name, comma, first name, space, middle initial, space, suffixes, if there are any. Write the name as it appears on the label. Do not try to put the collector's full unabbreviated name. We also only list one person in the collector/observer field, while additional collectors go into the associated collectors field. Lastly, a complete absence of a collector name is entered as unknown. On occasion, collectors will sometimes change the way they write their name on their labels. Here's just one example of a single collector that used several different styles when writing her name. In these cases, even though we are often aware that all these refer to the same collector, we still write the name in our usual format, but we defer to the name written on the label.
The collection number is typically found directly next to the collector's name on the specimen label. If there is no collection number at all, this field is entered as S.N. Note that not all of these will have the same format. However, we still enter the collection number verbatim, apart from commas. This slide provides several examples of more ways that a collection number might be written. As we discussed before, this number is still entered verbatim. The date field specifically refers to the date of collection. The format for this field is year-month-day. You may also come across labels that do not include the complete date or any date at all. To account for the missing data, enter 0 as placeholders. For example, if a date simply said February 12 with no year, you'd enter 0000-02-12. If the label lacks a date entirely, enter 0000-00-00 and enter S.D. in the verbatim date field.
Associated collectors, we follow the same formatting as the collector/observer field. Unlike the collector/observer field, it is okay to include more than one name in this field. For more than one associated collector, separate names using a semicolon.
This is a little bit more rare, but some labels will include an additional collector number for the associated collector as well. In these cases, the only deviation that we make from the format that we use for associated collectors is to include the associated collector number in parentheses after their name. In the verbatim date field, enter the date exactly as it appears on the label. Unlike the main date field, this field is not converted to a specific format. If a collection has more than one date, first enter only the earliest date into the main date field. In the verbatim date field, enter both dates, separating them with a semicolon and entering the earliest date first. Then click the pencil icon to add an additional field which allows you to input a collection date range. The entry in the main date field will be carried over automatically. However, you still have to calculate the day of year for the second collection. Use the link provided on the slide to do this. Then enter the calculated number into the second day of year field. We will now address the latest identification fields. Please see the slide found after the discussion of the family field for what to do if the autofield's scientific name, author, or family do not match the data the collector provided on their label. The scientific name field is simple. Just enter the scientific name as it appears on the label. As you begin to enter the name, a drop-down list will appear. While the drop-down list is useful for avoiding keystroke errors, still be sure to double-check that the correct name was selected. The author field is also simple, as it will be autofilled by Cernek after the scientific name is entered. Do not change anything that is autofilled. Enter the identification qualifier as it appears on the label into the identification qualifier field. Not all specimens will have an identification qualifier, and this field should only be entered for the relevant identification. Do not carry this over onto other determinations unless it was also included by the respective determiner. You may see identification qualifiers in various ways, such as between the genus and species, before or after the scientific name, or even without apparent context. These are the most common identification qualifiers that you'll see on determination labels. An exclamation point signifies agreement with the previous determination. As det signifies this as well. Not conveys that while the determiner is unsure on what the specimen's scientific name is, they are sure that is not what was previously determined. These specimens should be given to experts to also review the issue. CF dot conveys that the determiner is sure of the genus, but cannot confirm the species as the specimen lacks distinguishing characteristics. AFF dot also conveys that the determiner is confident of the genus, but the specimen is distinctive from the proposed species, or it is uncertain whether the specimen falls within the range of variability. This is a very clear example for an identification qualifier and what information the determiner is conveying to us. The exclamation point alone tells us that he agrees with the determination preceding his own. He also conveys this by including the abbreviation for the scientific name. Here are a few more examples of identification qualifiers and how they are written. This last example for the identification qualifier is a special case. The determiner has given us a scientific name, but has also made the comment that this is his best guess. However, we don't know exactly what he means by this. Is he confident with the genus but not the species? Does he believe that this is the correct species but does not see the typical physical characteristics of it? For the uncertainty in this instance, we will use the qualifier CF dot. Similar to the author field, the family field is also auto-filled in by Cernek after the scientific name is entered. Again, do not change anything that is autofilled. Mistakes do happen, and sometimes the data that is physically listed on the specimen may be different from what Cernek will fill in automatically. Sometimes this occurs due to copy-paste errors when the labels are made. For this issue, the best practice is to record these incidents. We highly recommend keeping an Excel sheet that includes the following information: barcode or catalog number, accession number, collector and collection number, collection date, collector provided scientific name, family name, and author name, Cernic provided scientific name, family name, and author name, the date that the issue was found and who it was found by, and if the discrepancy has been resolved. The specimen should be then given to an expert to review the issue and come to a determination. For the Identified by field, we initially enter the original determination on the label before any following more recent determinations. Unless the label specifies otherwise, we assume that the determination was made by the collector, and for these incidences, we include original date on label presumed to be by collector in the ID remarks. When the label does specify the determiner, we also still include original date on label, again in the ID remarks. The date identified field follows the same format as the main date field, that is, year, month, day. If no date is given, enter S.D. into the field. If the date is incomplete, use zeros as placeholders as we have shown before. For example, May 2009 would become 2009-05-00.
The reference source used to make the identification goes into the ID references field. Write the references verbatim. These are usually found near an identification, most of the time on an annotation label. The identification remarks field acts as a catch-all for any remarks about the identification with the exception of the ID references. Separate the types of remarks with a semicolon. The most common types are comments about the determiner, comments about the determination, project names the annotation was from, and taxon remarks. Comments about the determiner include what institutions the determiner is associated with, and if we are presuming that the collector is the determiner. The institution the determiner is associated with is usually written on the annotation label. Do not assume the institution. If no determiner and no determination date are provided on the herbarium specimen label, write original date on label, presumed to be determined by collector. If there is no determination date provided specifically for the original determination on the specimen label, write original date on label. Comments specifically about the determination are anything related to the determination itself, such as explanations why the determiner provided the determination they did, and or comments about how sure they are about the determination. Some annotation labels mention a project that the annotator was working on that led to them annotating the specimen. We also include these in the identification remarks. The taxon remarks field is not currently being used because it is tied to the record, not to the individual determinations. Taxon remarks include common names and label notes regarding hybridization, cultivars, etc. These are the fields that we will address in this presentation. The rest of the fields will be covered in the georeferencing data processing presentation. Some fields require additional research before they are fully processed. This presentation only covers basic data entry, so we will go over how to get the data entered. If you are doing the record from start to finish, you will need to reference the georeferencing data processing presentation to fully complete these fields. The country field on Cernic is where the country the specimen was collected in is placed. It is the first level administrative subdivision. Cernic follows the Getty thesaurus for country name. For all specimens collected in USA, the country is United States. If a specimen is collected outside of the United States, please reference the georeferencing data processing presentation. Based on the label, the data processor should be able to tell that the location is in the United States. If you are unsure, please reference the georeferencing data processing presentation or ask for assistance. The options for the country don't start showing up until you've typed at least 2 letters. So if I just put U, nothing is going to pop up. Once I put N, you will start to see options. So you're going to select United States and then go over. second level administrative subdivision, or the state/province that the herbarium specimen was collected in, goes in this field. For specimens collected in the United States, always make sure that the state is spelled correctly. Write out abbreviated states. For example, S.C. is South Carolina. Do not put extra spaces in the state name. This is an index field, and the state name should appear as you are typing. If a specimen is collected outside of the United States, please reference the georeferencing data processing presentation. The state is usually found near the top of the label. It can be found as part of the project name, such as Plants of South Carolina or Flora of North Carolina, or even Botanical Survey of Maura limestone enchant formations in South Carolina. Sometimes it is on there abbreviated, and sometimes it is simply written on there. If you cannot find the state, please ask for assistance. State works exactly the same as country, so I put one letter, nothing shows up. I start typing, and then you can select. The third level administrative subdivision, or the county that the herbarium specimen was collected in, goes in this field. For specimens collected in the United States, don't add the word county, co.co, or any additional words. Spell the county correctly. This is an index field, so the county name should appear as you are typing. If a specimen is collected outside of the United States, please reference the georeferencing data processing presentation. Just like state and country, one letter, nothing shows up. I start typing and options pop up. County is usually found near the top or the beginning of the herbarium specimen label. Sometimes it is part of the project name. Some records may need additional research. In this case, reference the georeferencing data processing presentation. Here are some examples. Some labels may have old herbaria information on it that includes the location of the herbarium. Here's an example. This specimen is currently housed at USCH, but it was from the Ives Herbarium in Greenville County when the label was made. The county of the herbarium is right next to the ex-herbaria information. However, this can be confusing, so if you are unsure, please ask for assistance. The fourth level administrative subdivision, or the municipality that the herbarium specimen was collected in, goes in this field. Stardock follows the Getty Thesaurus. Just because a city is mentioned on the label does not mean that the specimen was collected in that city. If no municipality is given by the collector, leave this field blank. Here's an example of a herbarium specimen label that mentions a city, and it is collected in that city. In this case, the municipality is Woodford. In this example, there is also a municipality on the herbarium specimen label. However, it says that it is 10 air miles southwest of downtown Barton, meaning it is not in Barton. So Barton will not go in the municipality field. At USCH, which processes specimens in stages, the data processor leaves locality blank. Please refer to your manager for instructions. For more detailed information, see the georeferencing data processing presentation. To give you a broad picture of how locality is written, here's the basic structure. The main, broadest area goes first, then a semicolon, and then the rest follows separated by a comma. It is written to be broken down by hierarchy. Imagine that you are using a map to find the place. Most labels are written bottom up. Here's a quick example to give you an idea of how it looks. Here's our label. Step 1. Identify the largest, broadest area that the specimen is on. if someone wanted to get into a car and drive to this location, where would they go first? US 17. Step 2. Where on US 17 is the specimen located? 1.6 miles southwest from its junction with State Road 167. It's written as S167 on the label, but we know if you are looking it up in georeferencing that it's State Road S15 167 or Pon Pon Plantation Avenue. Step 3. Is there any additional information? It's on the south side of US 17. And so in step 4, we finally put it all together. US 17, semicolon, 1.6 miles southwest of junction with State Road S15 167, south side of road. There may be a lot more than 4 steps, depending on how complicated it is to describe the location. If the label specifically mentions that the location is a private residence and has a name associated with it, set the security to landowner concern. These will show up as private residence or property of or blank's property. Apply security, navigate to the security drop-down box that by default says security not applied. Select security. In the reason box, type landowner concern. Here are some examples of private residence appearances on herbarium specimen labels. Anything and everything to do with location, even if it is repeated in habitat, goes into location remarks. Georeferencers will often reference this field when working, so everything they need to find the specimen location from the label should be available to them in this field. Sometimes the location remarks are mixed into the label depending on who wrote the label, so there will be a certain amount of parsing involved. Here is an example of how we would handle location remarks. The label information says 4.5 miles north of junction Forest Service Road 715 and 715A. Deep drainage on wooded slope, oak hickory forest. The location remarks would contain 4.5 miles north of junction Forest Service Road 715 and 715A, deep drainage on wooded slope. In this example, the abbreviations are written out in brackets. This is mainly done by georeferencers. The habitat would contain deep drainage on wooded slope, oak hickory forest. In this example, deep drainage on wooded slope was repeated in location remarks and habitat. Some collectors will provide coordinates of where they found the specimen on the herbarium specimen label. These go into the verbatim coordinates field. If the collector provided other types of coordinates, such as UTM, or other geographical identifiers, such as TRS, those will also be entered into the verbatim coordinates field. If the collector provided verbatim coordinates, type the coordinates into the verbatim coordinates field exactly as they appear. They probably won't carry over, and that's okay. If the coordinates are in decimal degrees, like the ones pictured in this label, copy the coordinates into the decimal lat and long, like so. You may find what are called reference coordinates provided by the collector. In this example, the collector put the coordinates of the trailhead, but says the specimen was actually collected 720 feet from those coordinates. These are not the coordinates of the collection. They go into location remarks along with all other location information. Some collectors will put multiple geographical identifiers on a label, such as having coordinates and TRS, or UTM coordinates and coordinates in decimal degrees. Prioritize putting coordinates, specifically decimal degrees, into the verbatim coordinates field. However, make sure that all geographical identifiers are in location remarks. Latitude and longitude make up the coordinates used to map the specimen. Some labels may provide coordinates or coordinate systems such as UTM that need to be converted. For the STARDEC map view to display, the latitude and longitude need to be in decimal degrees in WIGS 84. As mentioned previously on verbatim coordinates, If the verbatim coordinates are provided, and they are in decimal degrees, copy them into latitude and longitude fields. Otherwise, just leave the coordinates or the geographical identifier in verbatim coordinates. Here are some examples. The uncertainty is the accuracy of the georeferenced coordinates in meters. This is measured as the radius of a circle where the true point would be found if known. If coordinates are collected using a GPS, then the accuracy would be the error found within the GPS unit. Most labels do not have uncertainty on them. Only enter something for uncertainty if it is provided on the label. Most of the time, if the label has uncertainty, it's located near the coordinates. Here are two examples where the uncertainty is given on a label. On the left-hand side, the collector provided a range. Always choose the maximum end of the range. In this case, that is 100 feet. The uncertainty should be given in meters though, so we convert it to meters and get 30. We put 30 in the uncertainty field. On the right-hand side, the collector provided the uncertainty in meters, so we put 1,000 in the uncertainty field. The datum is the spatial reference system of the coordinates. This is mainly important for coordinates collected by the collector because depending on their method and equipment used, there can be a measurable difference between NAD 27, NAD 83, and WIGS 84. If it's provided on the label, enter it in the field. Otherwise, leave this field blank. Here are some examples of herbarium specimen labels that did provide the datum. Verbatim elevation is the elevation provided by the collector on the herbarium specimen label. Collectors will sometimes refer to elevation as ELEV, which is short for elevation, or ALT, which is short for altitude. They may provide the elevation in meters or feet and might provide a range instead of a single number. Whatever the collector provides, you will write it into the verbatim elevation exactly as it appears on the label, special characters and all. Here are some examples of verbatim elevation on herbarium specimen labels. Again, write the elevation exactly as it appears. It is okay if the verbatim elevation does not carry over to minimum and maximum elevation fields. The point is that the verbatim elevation is in the verbatim elevation field. You may run into an issue that when you are trying to save your record, it will not let you save. There's a known issue in which Specify put the converted elevations into maximum elevation, but CERNEC will not let the record be saved. A minimum elevation only can be saved, but not a maximum elevation only. If this happens, empty the elevations fields and write the verbatim elevation into the verbatim elevation field and save. The depth refers to the depth of the water that the plant was collected in. Depth is the distance from the surface of the water to the bottom of the body of water. Verbatim depth is the depth as it's written on the label. Here are some examples of depth on vascular herbarium specimen labels. Algae will be covered in another presentation. As you can see, the depth was written in a variety of ways. It is written precisely as it appears on the label to the verbatim depth field.
We will now address the fields found in the miscellaneous section. In terms of general formatting for the miscellaneous section, treat these fields like sentences apart from the associated taxa field. This means capitalization at the beginning, punctuation, and a period at the end. Repetition in the miscellaneous section is okay. Some portions of the label may be applicable to multiple fields. For example, substrate comments in both the habitat and substrate fields. Additionally, if the collector used abbreviations, write out the meaning in brackets, especially if it's not obvious. The data standards for the habitat field are to write in full sentences with capitalization, punctuation, and a period at the end. Repetition is also okay here. Once again, write out the abbreviations in brackets, especially if the meaning is not obvious. When we refer to the habitat, we are specifically describing the collection site. For example, shaded woods, moist bog, clear-cut field, roadside, etc. We also include the associated taxa in this field, as well as the distribution and substrate. Some labels, particularly algae, may have other measurements included, such as air temperature, water temperature, and salinity. These measurements would also go into the habitat field as well. Here are a few more example labels and what is entered into the habitat field. This slide also displays more examples for the habitat field and how to include the information. We will now move on to the substrate field. Substrate data standards include writing in full sentences, that is, capitalizing the beginning, adding punctuation, and having a period at the end. In the substrate field, we include the full description of the substrate and write it as a sentence with capitalization and a period, similar to the habitat field. Here are a few more substrate examples, along with how the field would be entered. Our format for the associated taxa field uses only scientific names that are found in the drop-down list. We don't use abbreviations here or convert common names that were included in the habitat field. We also don't include a period at the end of the list. So these guidelines for associated taxa were created because there's a long-term plan to be able to match these taxa to certain taxon ID, which can then be used to recognize or get data to back up associations. It can also potentially be used for an alternate Cernic view in which you search a taxon and all the specimens that list as an associated taxa are then shown. Associated taxa are those that are found along with the collected specimen within the habitat. The labels should be read carefully to ensure that all of the associated taxa are included. The associated taxa may include a genus and species, a genus only, or common names in place of scientific names. It is also common to see scientific names written in italics with the genus capitalized. If you encounter common names, these are not included in this field. When you begin typing a scientific name, a drop-down list will formulate. You can select the scientific name from the list to help avoid spelling errors, but always double-check afterwards that the appropriate name was selected. If multiple species within the same genus are mentioned, it is common for the collector to abbreviate the genus, using only the first letter of it, followed by a period, and then the species. To find the genus, look for the preceding scientific name. Write out the abbreviated name as it appears in the habitat field, but spell out the genus fully in the associated taxa field. Here are two examples of associated taxa inclusions on two different specimen labels. Notice that in the second example, it also includes the common name pine, but we don't enter this into the associated taxa field. The description field is used to describe the specimen's physical characteristics. This may also include numerical values such as the height of the plant. If abbreviations are used, write out the meaning in brackets. Here are a few more description examples and how they are entered into the description field. At this time, we leave the phenology field blank unless the individual that's processing the data is certain of the specimen status. The Darwin Core Standards additionally refer to this field as the reproductive condition. Our previous standards included entering reproductive for all records, but this doesn't always apply to the specimen. Multiple descriptors are also okay to include and will be separated by a comma.